Not exactly a request video, but I'm going to do a video on the bump stock ban being repealed. There's very little I can add to this except some comments that I gave someone who posted, hey, here's a video about a lawyer or a legal beagle discussing it. First of all, I'm going to point out a couple of things about it. Bump stocks have the effect of giving you fully automatic fire emulation in a firearm, but they're not technically an automatic weapon itself, nor is it a modification to the firearm to make it fully automatic or automatic in any way. Auto reloading or uh, uh, semi-auto weapons, which just means it auto reloads, it's not semi anything, don't fire more often than when you pull a trigger. And there isn't anything in a bump stock, unless you add a spring to it, that would change that. Legitimately, if you put a spring in one and have it do the work instead of your hand acting as an elastic mechanism to do this, it's not a machine gun. It doesn't matter if you like that. I think they're completely useless, and they reduce your ability to aim, and they're really only useful for indiscriminate fire. And they're considered a range toy by anybody who uses guns. But Stephen Paddock used them on multiple firearms and was able to fire 1,000 rounds in a very short period of time into a crowd, which is seemingly the only purposeful use for them, besides spraying an entire shooting range for the entertainment value. As a range toy that would be kept at a range, a lot like a machine gun can be owned by the shooting range, legally I might add, it other than that has no real purpose. Now, it didn't help that legislators in the House and the Senate and various others started adding random things to the bump stock ban concept, literally proving that some politicians will look for anything, any excuse possible to ban literally just random shit. A extendable or collapsible stock to make it to where you can collapse it down or fold it is not a bump stock. The collapsible type, however, if you were to add a spring to it, no, that still wouldn't work. These were people who aggressively, and I mean that in the worst trolling way, aggressively ignored the definitions and were trying to push through. I'm not kidding. It was extendable stocks and random shit, continually repeating something that was not correct in the first place and refusing to acknowledge that it was something you could easily look up, proving that aggressive ignorance and making laws is something that should not be allowed at all. If you're aggressively stupid, you should be barred from introducing legislation for one entire term, meaning you're useless, and also not be allowed to vote. I would absolutely pass that kind of law. Ignorance is one of the, not ignorance, lying about something is one of those things I would punish people up to almost the point of literally, throwing them in prison for life or worse. I really hate it. And yes, the individual who was making that assertion that a collapsible stock was a bump stock was lying. He was aware of it, but he wanted to get attention and become famous for 5 minutes. Next. At 1 minute and 56 seconds of a video that was suggested to me, I have commented, this is why it's not being upheld as easily as it could. The bump stock ban was instituted as a demand through the Justice Department or whatever to have the ATF just simply reclassify things arbitrarily rather than doing it the legal way. Now, I have made a video previously that this has the effect of a machine gun because I'm kind of insulting machine guns. A well-made machine gun is controllable, and a very well-made bump stock on the right kind of gun is controllable. But virtually every other case, they're not, as far as bump stocks. And virtually all machine guns have the same problem. That's why I'm talking about MAC-10s and crap, street sweepers or whatever you want to call them. That's why most militaries only use select fire 3-round burst or 2-round burst. It's useful. It actually hits what you're aiming at, and it's not indiscriminate. Indiscriminate shooting causes you to be guilty of a war crime. That's why the militaries avoid them. Except if you're doing it for suppressive fire where you're shooting into an area in general. Your utility is extremely limited. But the reason it's not being upheld as easily, and can't be, even though I don't like that the conservative biased Supreme Court or whatever might have made a decision, or whatever court it was. Doesn't matter what court it is. The reason is that the way it was passed violates a bunch of rules, including a rule called leniency or something like that. Basically, if you have a rule you're about to pass that will effectively, this is not what the rule means, but this is the effect of it. If it doesn't do any good, and it only does harm to people who would never ever do anything bad with the item you're trying to ban, it has no useful purpose. You have to err on the side of not fucking over large numbers of people. Also, it should be pointed out that most people who own these just sent demand letters to have the records erased of what they bought and refused to divulge that they owned them. So there's thousands of these things owned by people. And they're not being used by anybody because they don't want to be seen in public with them. And again, it's just a toy to use shooting at targets. Stephen Paddock is probably the only person I found that you can find that used one of these things in a way that actually had the effect that people talk about here, which is the reason the laws were passed about this. Except, it should be pointed out that many states banned these things originally. States, cities, and counties can ban them or make them restricted-ish. 12 out of 50 states decided to do this over time. Whether it's still banned or not is, you'd have to go look it up. Vermont, Delaware, Hawaii, Maryland, Massachusetts, Washington, D.C., California, New York, New Jersey, Florida, and Nevada, and then specifically Northbrook, Illinois, and Boulder, Colorado. At one time or another, or even now, have made them to where they're extremely restricted or it's a felony or whatever. Now, the other part of this was the definition used for liability to prosecution being given immunity. Yes, mostly conservatives did this. They tried to pass a rule that says you can't sue a gun maker for what a gun is used for by a murderer. It's not intrinsically a defect in the design of a gun if you make a firearm component that has a direct effect on the mechanism or operation of a firearm that enhances its ability to take out a deer or hit a target. You can't sue them for it being misused by someone breaking one of the basic rules. Do not point a firearm at anything you do not intend to destroy. Know about your backstop and target and what's behind them. And a bunch of other basic rules on safety. If someone is ignoring them because they're literally trying to commit mass murder, you can't hold the person who built the gun or the component liable. Accessories don't have that immunity from prosecution because some accessories can have inherent flaws in it. But if it's an inherent, not flaw, but a component, suing them for the consequences of it rather than it being defective is different. If you get a semi-automatic weapon and the thing fires eventually in full auto when it's not supposed to because a part wore out, as can happen in Glocks, yeah, you can sue them. Well, but it's a component. It's a component that failed. It's defective. Well, we want a limit on that. That's not acceptable. And yes, the part in a Glock that can make it go full auto can also happen if it wears out. If the company does not practice due diligence, they should be sued because you could fire the gun and it go off a bunch of times and end up shooting somebody. I mean, literally the gun can just sit there and shoot. It's in full auto mode and the trigger's jammed. That's actually happened only once, but that's an extreme case. Or if somebody makes something that is only useful for shooting an entire crowd of people, that's what the bump stock lawsuit was about. Its only real purpose is to indiscriminately shoot. Yes, but its indiscriminate shooting intended purpose, if you're going to argue that, was to shoot at targets or blow away a bunch of watermelons on YouTube videos. It was never meant to be a self-defense item. Except a couple of companies decided to market it as a self-defense item or an assault weapon on purpose. They decided to do the Macho Rambo bullshit. So a lawsuit being blocked because you just gave them carte blanche to be able to claim, oh, this is a component, not an accessory. Then they have to be legally barred from claiming it's an accessory instead of a component later in some other case, right? You'll have to look that up. The definition of firearm component versus accessory is so murky that even websites that are supposed to clarify it won't. They just lump them together and there's no difference. But there's laws that refer to them that way, separately. But they don't include the definition. That's a problem. So why am I making this video? Number one, I'm in favor of the right to people to make, keep, and bear arms. I have a problem with people making laws about ghost guns as a scare tactic for somebody making a firearm because they simply can't afford any, or they want to experiment with guns and ammunition to work up a new load or whatever. Me making a test gun with a 30-inch SAMI spec barrel out of a hunk of water pipe that's Schedule 80, 3/4 inch, and drilling it with the 13/16 drill bit to make chambers on each end, and threading one of them so I can put jokes in it. Making a test gun like that isn't me making a ghost gun. I'm making a test fixture to test ammo. I'm pointing it straight into the ground and practicing every safety thing, but no, you have to put a serial number on it. Okay. I'm in a state that recently passed a law that says I have to have a permit to buy a gun. It does not cover me making one, because that would be treading over the right to, basically, if you're poor, you should be able to make a gun. If they want to regulate the ammo, they're going to do so. But what if I just buy a box of ammo and just keep reloading it? You can, I did a video on this a while ago. I can remake primers, and I can make propellant. I just have to be willing to lose a finger. But does any of this actually help with preventing gun violence? 60% of gun violence are people using a firearm on themselves. Or more. It's more than 60%. Some areas it's 80%. The gun violence that happens that actually takes life or maims is not being addressed. And both sides are avoiding that. The number of people that you're dealing with out there that commit crimes with, actual crimes with firearms, they're not classified in the same way because we've thrown up our hands and decided we can't do anything about organized crime. We live in a society where the Los Angeles Police Department is dealing with an infiltration by actual criminal gangs and organized crime, and they won't fire the cops. They're obviously guilty because the union is blocking it. I'm not talking anti-union shit here. I'm just saying that the cop union won't let them fire somebody when they're obviously part of a gang. You should lower the bar for firing someone from being a cop. You don't have the right to put them in jail, but you should be able to fire them because they're not worth the risk. If it's something that would have kept them from getting hired in the first place, and you find out afterwards, you should be able to fire them immediately. Nope. There's a shit ton of corruption in that. And that's not being addressed. But organized crime, blah, 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 and then you have statistics. And people deliberately muff the statistics because it affects how much their house is worth in an area, or whether or not they can get a budget that year for their crime task force. They'll fake numbers, both low and high. And let's get down to mass shootings. What affects a mass shooting? The ability to fire a lot of shots. That's not something anybody can argue. Then again, if you fire a 12 gauge into a crowd, it's like emptying 5 Glocks. Every shot's like emptying an entire Glock mag. It can be that bad. But they're not used very much. Long guns are almost never used. It's almost always pistols. And again, the majority of people who die due to firearm violence are self-inflicted. Even panic is an example of that. Machine guns are almost never used in criminal actions anymore because they're just not available. That actually worked. That form of gun control worked. Bump stocks were almost never used, except by Paddock. What is the best way to handle this? I have no clue. But I do know I have a problem with not going after what's actually a problem. Mental health, suicide, and people losing it. And then a couple of days ago, some kid decided to shoot people at a school, and there was a warning. Maybe we need to do a better job just assuming that we should take warnings seriously. But would that really work? All I know is these rules don't seem to work very well. And rulings that are done illegally, effectively, inappropriately, do even less. And politicians that try to, throw things under the bus because that makes them look like they're doing something aren't solving anything either. Tell me what you want me to do. Tell me. Maybe we'll figure it out in our comment section here. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that.